It's Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025. Did we find the cause of autism? Not quite. As it turns out, terrorism works after all, and what the federal government is going to do about it. Next on the AM Update.
The meteoric rise in autism is among the most alarming public health developments in history. There's never been anything like this. Just a few decades ago, 1 in 10,000 children had autism. So that's not a long time. And I've always heard, they say a few, but I think it's a lot less time than that. It used to be 1 in 20,000, then 1 in 10,000. And I would say that's probably 18 years ago. And now it's 1 in 31. But in some areas, it's much worse than that, if you can believe it. 1 in 31.
President Trump yesterday holding an announcement ceremony flanked by his various public health chiefs, including HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Dr. Jay Bhattacharya at NIH, and others, announcing some of their plans and action steps on dealing with the scourge of autism. President Trump made this announcement. He's telling the FDA to go after acetaminophen, that's the active ingredient in Tylenol for pregnant women.
Tylenol during pregnancy can be associated with a very increased risk of autism. So taking Tylenol is not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good.
So, did we find the cause of autism? This is what was kind of promised a few months ago, and I don't think that we did. RFK Jr. called out some of the hypocrites, again, who just completely spit in the face of mothers who said, one day I had a perfectly healthy baby. The next day, it was just a shell of him or herself.
Our friends like to say that we should believe all women. Some of these same people have been silencing and demonizing these mothers for 3 decades. Because research on the potential link between autism and vaccines has been actively suppressed in the past. It will take time for an honest look at this topic by scientists. But I want to reassure the people in the autism community that we will be uncompromising and relentless in our search for answers.
So here is the autism action plan from the White House. Number 1, informing doctors and families. They say the FDA will issue a physician notice and initiate a safety label change on acetaminophen products. HHS also going to be launching a nationwide public service campaign to inform families and protect public health. Step 2, making therapeutics available. They say the FDA will act to establish the first recognized therapeutic, leucovorin, I think is how you say it, for children with cerebral folate deficiency and autistic symptoms. More on that in just a little bit. And they say they're going to be increasing funding for autism research. On that folate deficiency, I should say, here's RFK Jr. once again.
Research has revealed that folate deficiency in a child's brain can lead to autism. We have also identified an exciting therapy that may benefit large numbers of children who suffer from autism. Peer-reviewed literature has documented that up to 60% of folate-deficient children with ASD can have improved verbal communications if given leucovorin. I have instructed NIH, FDA, and CMS to help doctors treat children appropriately. Jay will help tell that story.
So this is the only part of that press conference yesterday. And this is, President Trump thinks this is a big deal. RFK Jr. apparently thinks this is a big deal to hold this press conference at the White House. Obviously taking time out of their busy schedules to do so. But this is probably the only thing of interest to me is the introduction of leucovorin. So they have discovered apparently this link between autism and folate deficiencies, and this therapeutic allegedly will help with that. But then again, as I understand, this therapeutic has been around for a while. They're just changing the guidance as far as what it can be used for in this circumstance. I don't think if you're in the MAHA world, I think you're very underwhelmed with what you saw yesterday out of the White House. Because everyone knows if it's not technically the vaccines, it's what the vaccines do to either inflammation or your gastrointestinal tract that messes things up. Everybody knows this, or at least those most affected know this or suspect this. And that wasn't addressed. Vaccines were not at all addressed. I don't think they said anything about vaccines yesterday, not from the clips that I saw coming out. But on the other hand, maybe that was on purpose. Because if you think about this a little bit longer, they were never, ever, ever just going to come right out and say, vaccines cause autism. They were never going to do that. I wonder if it was purposeful that they didn't hardly mention vaccines. I guess Trump did say, give kind of his opinions about vaccines. They need to be spaced out a little bit more. But they didn't make any comment as far as a causal link or a chain of events leading to autism. I'm wondering if this is just kind of, I don't want to say grooming, that's the wrong word, but just expanding the Overton window about what can be talked about in polite society when it comes to autism and whether or not there are actually environmental causes for autism. Just a thought. Well, from the White House back to Jimmy Kimmel, who is alive. He has second life. ABC's Jimmy Kimmel Live will return tonight after a brief suspension. That's according to a press release from the Walt Disney Company. That press release stated, quote, "Last Wednesday, we made the decision to suspend production on the show to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. It's a decision we made because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive. We have spent the last days having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy, and after those conversations, we reached the decision to return the show on Tuesday." Of course, Jimmy Kimmel Live was pulled after he just told the abject lie that the Charlie Kirk assassin was a member of MAGA. It was untrue at the time. It was untrue before he actually made those comments, but he rolled with the lie anyway. I've seen various polling over the last week or so. Great swaths of Democrats believe that Charlie Kirk's assassin was MAGA, that he was shot because he wasn't right-wing enough, and that just couldn't be further from the truth, and we knew that since a week ago Friday. Nevertheless, what this story is indicating is that terrorism works. I didn't see this until yesterday, but Sinclair, that broadcasting company with dozens of ABC affiliates, they came out with a very strong statement against Jimmy Kimmel, providing an ultimatum: either he apologizes or we're never putting him back on the air on our affiliate stations. And then they further added, we're going to be running during Friday night's Jimmy Kimmel's slot, we're going to be running a Charlie Kirk tribute. Well, apparently Sinclair and their stations faced terroristic threats, so they decided not to air that Charlie Kirk memorial special remembering his life. Of course, we told you about that Sacramento ABC affiliate that was shot up by that left-winger. We have more on that story this morning as well. Confirmed to be a left-winger. Independent journalists did their own independent research, and they already came to that conclusion, but now officials in California are making that same conclusion as well. And now Jimmy Kimmel is going to be back on the air. So I guess terrorism works. That's the message that ABC is sending. That's the message that Sinclair was sending prior to last night when they did announce that they're going to continue to preempt Jimmy Kimmel. So if Nexstar, which is another broadcasting company that owns a bunch of local ABC affiliates, if Nexstar continues to decline to air Jimmy Kimmel Live on their stations, then ABC's decision to put Kimmel back on the air is kind of moot because there aren't going to be any TV stations of import carrying the show. We'll have more about what the White House plans to do to combat left-wing terrorism, particularly when it comes to Antifa, and what I'm seeing and some concrete action steps coming up in Air Analysis. Well, quickly before the break, some more polling came out about the 2028 Democrat primary, and Kamala Harris, still the leader in the clubhouse at 23%. Gavin Newsom is in second place, 17%. Buttigieg at 7%. I'm surprised he's actually polling that high. Newsom is actually the biggest riser amongst those big names, rising 4% since the last time Echelon polled. Could you believe it? In 2028, if Democrats decided to do the Kamala Harris redux, wouldn't that be something? Well, when we come back, news from the White House, their opinion on what some of those countries like Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia are doing when it comes to the so-called Nation of Palestine. Also, dispatches from Minneapolis. That's coming up next. Caroline Leavitt at the White House yesterday reacting to the news that Canada, Australia, United Kingdom all recognizing the so-called phony nation, made-up nation of Palestine.
As for all of these Western nations that are recognizing a Palestinian state, the president has been very clear. He disagrees with this decision. He spoke about that in the UK, standing right next to his friend, Prime Minister Starmer, and he feels this does not do anything to release the hostages, which is the primary goal right now in Gaza, does nothing to end this conflict and bring this war to a close. And frankly, he believes it's a reward to Hamas. So he believes these decisions are just more talk and not enough action from some of our friends and allies. And I think you'll hear him talk about that tomorrow.
Not a surprise, United States not super jazzed with their allies deciding to extend an olive branch to Hamas. Again, I just keep coming back to, and all war is just terrible. War is hell. It is. And I wish that there were peace. But I just keep coming back to this is a fact or it's not a fact. If you want to challenge me on this, you can. You can bring your own, read of events. But as soon as we tried to do this Palestinian statehood thing, less than a decade later, I think this was the second attempt for the two-state solution. Less than a decade later, the Muslims of that area elected Hamas as their leadership, a terrorist organization as their leadership. That happened. I hate war. War is hell. I wish it was not happening. But this notion that a real two-state solution has never been tried, it's just false. 30 years of trying would seem to indicate that it's never going to work. Moving on. I saw this the other day, and I'm going to try to paint as best of a picture as I can. I believe this was at a counter-protest or a protest over the memorial service for Charlie Kirk. What I'm watching here, I wish there was a video element to the AM update sometimes, is a man holding a piñata effigy of Donald Trump. And an old lady, an older white woman, wearing a maca shirt. Now, what is maca? M-A-K-A. Kind of a play on MAGA. And what does maca mean? Make America Kind Again. She's wearing a Make America Kind Again shirt as she's pummeling a piñata effigy of Donald Trump. But it gets better. On the back of her shirt are the words, "Do unto others as they would do to you." Or as you would have them do unto you. And she's beating this effigy of Trump. That is the boomer lib singularity right there. They signal their virtue, and then they act however they wish. We go to Minneapolis now. Here's Mayor Jacob Forray.
Maaga Egawa Jacob Forray. Doke Magalada, Minneapolis. Damaan, Sha'abka Somaliyed. Kayimid, Mogadishu, Garowe, Hargeisa, Bosaso.
Yeah, in case you thought you were having a stroke there, no, that's Jacob Forray, current mayor of Minneapolis. I believe he's running for mayor again. He is speaking now Somalian. Actually, he pulls it off pretty well.
Hamid Tihin, Laf Dabarka. Magaladan, Ka
You need to get a little bit more in your Somalian there. Just saying, okay? But otherwise, he's doing pretty well. Anyway, I believe the translation in English of what he was saying there, I am a dimwit who played a role in the continued transformation of Minneapolis into Little Mogadishu. And I'm afraid of this population that we have imported. That's the English translation of what he's saying there. And now here's this. So I have talked about multiple occasions now, we need concrete plans for tearing apart leftist power structures legally while we still can peaceably. We need concrete plans for how we're going to tear that apart brick by brick. Well, at the White House yesterday, in the alternative media seat, sat Monica Page Baldwin from TPUSA Frontlines. They gave her the alternative media seat in the White House press briefing room, and good on the White House for doing that. She asked Caroline Leavitt, White House press secretary, about what the administration's concrete plans are for dealing with Antifa Here's Caroline Levitt.
Well, Antifa is going to be designated a domestic terrorist organization. The president intends to sign that executive order very soon as it's drafted, as soon as today, later this afternoon. And this is something the president campaigned on because we have seen a rise in violence perpetuated by Antifa radical people across this country who subscribe to this group. And unfortunately, it's gone widely uncovered by many in the legacy media. It also went completely ignored by the previous administration. Not anymore. Not only, as you mentioned, were the bullet casings subscribed with Antifa mottos, if you will, in the heinous assassination of Charlie, but there have also been more examples than I could read off for you here in this briefing room today of violence from Antifa. I will just read a few. In July 2025, several members of an Antifa cell ambushed and opened fire on officers at an ICE facility in Alvarado, Texas, shooting one officer in the neck. Also in July 2025, 3 Antifa members were charged with assaulting a police officer during a violent riot outside an ICE facility in Portland, which for weeks prior had been under siege from the local Antifa terror cell. In February 2024, a transgender Antifa terrorist detonated an explosive device outside of the office of the Republican Attorney General of Alabama. In July 2023, Antifa members linked to abortionist group Jane's Revenge firebombed pro-life facilities and vandalized churches. In January 2022, a suspected Antifa member was arrested for bringing a pipe bomb to a pro-Trump event. In January 2021, an Antifa supporter threatened to shoot police officers and Trump supporters outside of the Florida State Capitol building. Again, I could continue to list many more examples for those in the room who don't believe this is a serious threat to American safety and our national security, but this administration knows that it is. That's why the president will be signing this order. And we will also be, most importantly, looking at who is funding Antifa and who is funding these other violent left-wing groups that we've seen perpetuate so much crime and mayhem across our country.
Caroline Levitt at the White House yesterday, bringing the receipts. And you can tell, so there's no concrete steps, what happens next other than designating Antifa as a terrorist organization. But it does show that they do have their cause. They do have their prima facie evidence that will likely hold up in court. And of course, they're going to get sued for declaring Antifa to be a terrorist organization. So they're already doing some research here. They already have everything lined up in terms of, hey, this is why we're going to be doing this in case courts come after them. Now, it's going to be a challenge with an organization like Antifa because they operate very much like Al-Qaeda or various terrorist networks around the globe. They operate as cells. There's no centralized structure. So how are you going to deal with that? That's what people want to hear. How are you going to deal with something where it's basically a hydra, a form of a hydra? Well, independent journalist Andy Ngo, who is the OG reporter, independent reporter on Antifa in this country. He has spent time in Portland where Antifa is, that's kind of probably where they're concentrated the most, but he's been everywhere reporting on Antifa for years now. He posted this over the weekend, quote, "According to a source not authorized to speak on record, there are those in the U.S. government actively working to designate Antifa as a foreign terrorist organization. This is the move required to give the president's declaration teeth. It would open up significant avenues for prosecution and sanctions, as decentralized American Antifa networks often work with their international partners to promote anarchist and communist violent extremism, solicit attacks on targets, and provide instructional materials on methods for attack, including on infrastructure and government officials." So now we're starting to get even more specifics with how we are going to take down Antifa. And finally, air analysis, slightly acidic, mostly necessary. This is all very well and good. And what's going to be required here is a broad-based attack on left-wing violent extremism. Because Antifa, one day, Antifa is now a terrorist organization. Now we're gonna call ourselves Lantifa. Lantifa is a terrorist organization. We're going to call ourselves Trantifa. That already exists, but you get my meaning. We cannot afford to play whack-a-mole here, so it's going to have to be a broad-based action. But this is only the first in 1,000 bricks that needs to be removed from the leftist power structure. You heard Caroline Leavitt there say just a little bit ago that they're going to be going after funding for some of these groups. And what a big web that could be. That would be important. But again, it's just one of 1,000 steps in a full frontal attack on the left, on their power structures. And what do I mean when I say power structures? I'm not just talking about their institutions. I'm talking about the broad-based support that they have for the most left-wing, demonic, and violent ideologies. Going down to the street level. These are their shock troopers, their storm troopers. And yes, getting them off of the streets is a great first step, but that's just one brick. You have to go to the funders. You have to go up to their various touts in their media, their various supporters in government. You have to take down that entire structure. And we're only talking about one organization, Antifa. We haven't even gotten to academia yet, although they are all connected. This is just one of 1,000 bricks that need to be removed. So I hope the administration, I hope the federal government, under the control now of friendly forces, I hope they are up to the task. If you ask somebody like White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, it certainly sounds like they're up to the task. But we need to see it, and we need to see it fast. That's going to do it for Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.